Let's start with recovery. I know that it's not just limited to rest. There's actual rest when you're on the couch and maybe you are doom scrolling on Instagram, but there's also other modalities. Let's start with recovery. Why is this so important, particularly for women in perimenopause, where they might be, as I am noticing, that I don't recover as quickly as I used to. I actually need a little bit more of a runway before I get back into the gym and repeat a workout.
Yeah. So there's quite a few different things that we should really identify here. So if we're thinking about recovery, it's a lot of people don't realize or don't connect the fact that the exercise stress is the breakdown. And so you need recovery to actually get stronger and adapt. So if you're always going in kind of half fueled with regards to muscle recovery, central nervous system recovery, and you're trying to do a workout, then you're not actually going to get the training stress you need to create the adaptations. So a lot of times people will go, oh, well, I just went through the motions and it was kind of a half-assed workout. It's like, well, you probably shouldn't have actually done that workout to that or tried to get to that intensity because you weren't actually pushing to the appropriate training stress to get the adaptations. So if we're talking about recovery in general, you have your acute recovery, which, we talk about right after exercise. And what do we do to bring our metabolism back down, instigate the body to get into an anabolic or building and repairing state? And then we have the chronic recovery. And this is where you're looking at your periodization models and when you're doing intensity, when you're doing low intensity days, how you're sleeping, how you're eating between sessions. And as we get to perimenopause, it becomes a factor that people really need to focus on because the body is under a significant amount of stress. We see this because every system of the body is being affected by a change in hormone status. We're having a change in our ratios of estrogen and progesterone. We're having more and more anovulatory cycles, which means we're not producing progesterone. And when we're looking at what happens with estrogen and the pulse of estrogen going up and down at a different rate than what it used to, then it affects bone, muscle, brain, central nervous system, everything. So you will find that you're not recovering as well as you used to, and you can't hit it as hard as you used to. And when we look at why that is, not only are we having all these changes from the hormones themselves, but we also have an increase in our sympathetic drive. Because when we're looking at the stress the body is under now, we see that women are now more tired but wired, and it is from a sympathetic drive. So if we're already in that flight or fight state or that sympathetic drive state, it's really hard to get another level up to hit an intensity to stress the body. And we find a lot of women will fall into more of a moderate kind of training, just kind of going through the motions, which then exacerbates that tired but wired and sympathetic drive. So there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah. I love where we're going with this. And I will just say for the listener, you need to ovulate in order. So you said anovulatory cycle. So we just want to underline that for a moment. In order for your body to release progesterone, you need to ovulate. And so these anovulatory cycles that you are describing, you may still have a bleed, but you may not necessarily have ovulated. And therefore that second half of the menstrual cycle that you're describing, you're not going to have that release of progesterone, which of course is very important in, I want to talk to you about sleep. We often think about progesterone affecting sleep, but it affects a whole host of other things. Brain health, it affects the body systemically.
It does.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about progesterone and the effect that it has on recovery in the body. And we can start with sleep if you'd like, or if you want to preface it with anything. But I want to really set the stage for what is the role if you are having some of these anovulatory cycles, which do happen more and more often in your mid 40s, and of course up until the point of menopause where you don't have a period anymore. What is the role of progesterone in recovery?
So it's anti-inflammatory in some aspects, but it's also counters estrogen. So when we think about what's happening here, we'll see a lot of women will have a heavier bleed with anovulation because estrogen is unopposed, so you get a thicker endometrial lining. So when we're talking about progesterone, its importance for mitigating a lot of things that estrogen does, we see not only is it within that menstrual cycle or that bleed phase, but when we think about progesterone, how it antagonizes estrogen, we see it affects like our heart rate variability. We see it affects our respiratory rate, our resting heart rate. We see it affects our fuel and our fueling mechanisms. And when we start seeing how it affects vagal tone, because it antagonizes estrogen, we have a change in our vagal tone, so our parasympathetic drive. So this is why when we see what's happening in perimenopause with a change in our ratios, we get that reduction of vagal tone. So we get that more sympathetic drive. So when we talk about recovery, it's really important to start instigating some more mindfulness and maybe even non-sleep deep rest strategies to instigate that parasympathetic drive. And when we're talking about sleep and how progesterone can somewhat help or interfere with sleep. When we start losing or not having as much progesterone, we do see an absolute change in our ability to get into a deep, restful sleep, as well as a change in sleep architecture. So when we talk about it in practical means, someone will look at me and go, well, what do you mean? It's like, can I just, what do I do about sleep? It's like, okay, now we have to look at how are we going to create an environment that is going to allow your body to get into a deep, restful, parasympathetic activation, which is what we need for sleep. So we can look again at some of the mindfulness practices, the non-sleep deep rest, which is also yoga nidra. And we can look at different supplements that we can use that is going to stimulate like the GABA system of the brain. And that's what L-theanine does. L-theanine is a non-protein amino acid that is used by the brain, activates more of the alpha waves, which is a parasympathetic drive. We see that having a cool room and drinking something cold before bed, which helps drop your core temperature and which also instigates parasympathetic response. So there are a lot of different things that we can do to really help with the sleep and sleep architecture. Because I think that's one of the very first things that people going through perimenopause will notice is a disruption in sleep. And most of the time they're like, oh, it's just because I'm highly stressed, or the kids woke me up, or all of a sudden become a light sleeper. And they're not tuning into the fact that there's a change in our hormones, which is really interfering with what's happening in our ability to sleep well.
Yeah. And I think with perimenopause in general, so of course we have these hormones that you're talking about where we're seeing this overall trending decline in everything, in estrogen, eventually in testosterone as well. But there's also environmental stressors as well. Like our children, your children, my children are about the same age, right? They're like in their teens. And then, many women through the journey of perimenopause will see their children off to college. And so there's these stressors from parenting teenagers, which is very different than parenting a toddler, let's say. And then you also have if you are the primary caregiver for your parents, seeing them age and now having to manage their medications and visits to the doctors and seeing their, in many cases die, right? So you're coming there's these other environmental stressors that I just want to highlight. So yes, of course, there's physiological stressors that we're talking about. And I think people also miss this idea that you're kind of in a stress sandwich. You have this pressure from below with these children that you're raising and grieving your loss of, being a mom. And as well being, seeing your parents age and, eventually pass.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think there's these stressors that women are just really great at just piling another thing into the backpack, right? It's like, yeah, okay, I got it. I got to do it. I just like, this is what I got to do to make it through. But just really recognizing that you have this physiological change that we're describing, and you have these really big life changes as well, all sort of coming, to butt heads at the same time.
Yeah. Oh, so when we're talking about it, like in our more high performance environments, we talk about the allostatic load, and we try to make people understand not only is it the training stress and the recovery from the training stress, but let's look at all the other stressors in your life. Because if you are overrun with daily stressors, then the exercise isn't a positive eustress. It is actually becoming more of a distress. And I know so many women are like, well, it's my time to decompress and to have my own time and space. But then we have to really look from the physicality standpoint of what kind of extra stress you're putting on.
Yeah.